everyone can hear me okay, and thanks to you all for joining us today. My name is Sharon Barrett, and I'm a director in the Dublin office of Duff & Phelps. So, as you know, we're here to talk to you today about business email compromise, which globally is becoming a really big cause of losses for companies over the past number of years. I'm pleased to be joined today by two of my colleagues from Kroll, who have significant experience in this area. And Kroll, for those of you who don't know, is a division of Duff & Phelps and is known as one of the leading providers of risk solutions over the past 45 years. So firstly, we have Kevin Hart, who is an Associate Managing Director in our Dublin office.
Hi, Sharon.
Kevin has extensive experience working in fraud investigations, and through that has come across numerous instances of business email compromise. We're also joined by James Thoburn, who is a Vice President in our EMEA Cyber Risk Practice and is an expert in dealing with breach incidents and threat investigations. So again, has come across a significant number of this type of issue. We will be recording the webinar, so it'll be on the website for anyone who wants to review it afterwards. And the format that we're going to take is just a general introduction into what business email compromise is, how it's performed, red flags, a couple of case studies, and then how to reduce and mitigate the risk of it happening to you in your business. We're also going to run a couple of polls throughout the webinar, which we'd ask you to participate in. And as we're trying to just stick to the 30-minute slot, we may not have an opportunity to get to all of your questions, but we will get back to you afterwards if you want to submit them in any event. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Kevin and James to take us through the detail of what comprises a business email compromise.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sharon. Thanks very much, everybody, for making time in your schedules to hopefully gain some insight into what we believe is a very important part of business risk management. Business email compromise during COVID-19, just to set the record clear, business email compromise is not because of COVID-19 at all. It has been around. However, James, you'll hopefully agree, we are seeing a large uptick in the number of incidents that we can say are related to business email compromise, due mainly to folk working outside of the office, working at home, where perhaps some of the controls need to be deviated from normal controls that you would have in the office. Would you agree there's a little bit of an uptick in what we're seeing at the moment?
Absolutely. I think as we're seeing organizations have to move to a different way of working that is in some cases vastly different because of this pandemic, it just represents risk that's inherent to having to very quickly move over to a brand new way of working, to perhaps not have the pre-existing security controls that they might have had for their traditional environments. So it both represents a risk on the side of organizations, but an opportunity on the sides of the potential adversaries and bad guys. Absolutely,
yeah. So what is business email compromise? So what we've tried to do is dilute it down to a very basic understanding. So it's an email-based phishing scam designed, firstly, to redirect payments in a fraudulent manner or cause data to be transmitted fraudulently to conduct financial fraud. The bottom line is the criminals want to use what they can against you to cause you to depart with your money, your hard-earned cash in a business. So we'll touch on some of the technical aspects that are used to create the situation, and hopefully at the end of it we'll offer some tips on how to avoid the risk going forward.
Okay, so thanks very much for that, Kevin. We're going to launch a quick little poll now. So the poll is basically asking how much was lost in dollar amounts to BEC compromise in the last year, do you think? So you have three options there. The options are for US dollars, 0 to 500 million, between 500 million to $1 billion, or above $1 billion. So just give a chance to everyone to have a little vote there. Great. Okay, so we're just going to share those results now. And Kevin, I'll let you
Yeah, so
discuss.
90% of our attendees say over and above $1 billion, which I think is spot on. James,
Yes.
anything to add there?
Yeah, I think that shows that everybody has a good understanding of the potential impact of this threat. The fact that no one has gone for 500 million or below is a little bit surprising, but indicates that it's at the forefront of people's minds.
Absolutely. And now the next slide we've put up is just hopefully a very graphical way of showing the problem. If you look at cyber crime and cyber-enabled crime, the business email compromise dwarfs all the rest of them by a long, long way. So these are numbers out of the FBI reported incidents as well. We have no idea of unreported incidents, and that figure will probably go up if we had, if everybody had reported what had happened. Looking a little bit closer to home within the EMEA region, so AIG Insurance collects very good statistics. So this goes back to 2018, but still very relevant. You can see already then 23% of cyber claims were related to business email compromise, and again dwarfed most of the other cyber-related incidents. On the right-hand side, what's very notable there is professional services is the leader, let's call it, in the victim category. James, what do you think is leading to that sort of outlier or the leading sector? What do you think contributes to that?
So I think quite often adversaries are looking for the weakest links or parts of a wider chain. So where can I get involved in legitimate transactions or conversations? And professional services firms sit between a lot of different types of organizations. So you're increasing your chance of having success out of a potential business email compromise campaign. That's, I think, one of the core reasons that really makes it a kind of viable target, if you like.
Great. So James, Clark Kent, Superman, the master of disguise. So in the old days, criminals would be able to disguise their actions or their intentions. These days, not so much. Tell us a little bit about the men in dark hoods.
Yeah, so there's many different ways for adversaries to try and mask who they are. It could be through the various anonymizing services out there. It could be that the fact that they're working with other cyber criminals and threat groups to be able to facilitate a wider campaign. But what we see, because they don't necessarily have to give very much away about who they are, there's less of a risk on their part, and they're willing to go further than perhaps we would have seen in the days of traditional crime, where you would have to present something about yourself, either your stature, your height, your voice, something. These days, you can do things online, leaving a very minimal trace of who you are, and that just opens it up to a much wider audience, I think, in terms of the kind of criminal side of it.
And they've got a lot bolder as well, I'd say. We shared we exchanged a story about cyber criminal posting his earned cash through business email compromise, sitting in his fancy car, and I think what gave him away was his tattoo. So yeah, you can hide, but eventually I think you'll be found. So let's just look at how BECs perform. Now, there's many ways that the attack vectors can look. So what we try to do is give you a summary and overview of the most typical. So a target is acquired. What do we mean? So the criminals have targeted a specific business, either because they think they know that there's particular weaknesses in the controls that they can exploit. They're going to stage 2. They've identified key people within those organizations, be it a CEO, a CFO, somebody in finance, somebody in a particular role that could be vulnerable and an easier target. So the grooming starts through a combination of telephone calls, social engineering, but what we often see is it's preceded by the spear phishing emails, or whale phishing as it's sometimes known as well. And James, from a sort of technical point of view, how difficult or easy is it for the phishing emails to inject the malicious code into a network? Is it difficult? Is it easy? Is it easy to spot?
It depends on the target. So it depends on who's receiving that email and what procedural and technical measures they've put in place. And, you know, we'll kind of touch on that a little bit later on. But fundamentally, they're looking to target the human. Something has to be convincing about that message to get them to do something with it. And then from that point onwards, it depends on your controls and processes that you have in place, but it can be very easy in some cases.
Excellent. So just to pause for a moment for our audience. So the criminals are after your money. So stage 2 is they've figured out where you're most vulnerable to depart with your money. So they go on to stage 3, which is the exchange of information. This is where the criminals, it could be through months, a few weeks, they've gained the trust of the target, and now they're exchanging that information. They're saying, right, the payment that I need you to do needs to go urgently to that bank account. So that's stage 3. And then stage 4, the actual enter button is pressed and the money is left your bank account in your business. It's hit what you thought was a legitimate bank account, but it's actually a bank account controlled by the criminals. A couple of quick facts. So looking broadly at some of the incidents that we've investigated and other parties have investigated, the number one, the business email compromise attacks are increased 10 times if the initial probe email is answered. So I know we get phishing emails coming in often. If you avoid clicking the very first one, you lower it by a factor of 10 times. Going forward, the common words and phrases that are often found in some of these phishing emails: are you at your desk? Are you available? It's important, it's urgent, and those type of words are often found. What it does is it ups the ante, so the person receiving the email, who they think is coming from a legitimate source, there's a sense of urgency and they act based on those requests. Just to say, not all the data that the criminals use is from a data breach. Often they use other sources of information, such as lead generation services, social media as well, a very rich source. You think you can look at somebody's social media, their LinkedIn profile, and get a lot of good information out of that. The criminals use that in their social engineering and the way they attack victims. Number 4, cyber insurance. Cyber insurance is available in the market. There are different forms of it. What we've seen, though, is that where there is social engineering cover as part of that insurance, a lot of organizations have simply opted out of taking that cover. So that's something for our audience to think about. Some of the most frequent scenarios that we'd like to describe: so impersonating a financial institution's customer. So I'm a customer of Bank A and I'm impersonated by the cyber criminal. Second scenario, posing as an executive. We touched briefly on that a little bit earlier. CEO fraud, it's also known as. Number 3, criminal impersonates a supplier. So supplier and your supply chain is a trusted network. If the criminals can impersonate and get into that supply chain, there is some vulnerabilities that you need to be aware of. Again, if we just pause for a moment, risk management as a whole should be looking at where your weak spots are, and you should be able to bring in controls to tighten those weaker areas. Real estate services is a fourth scenario, so we're seeing a bit of an uptick in that as well. James, are you seeing anything from a sort of technical point of view in real estate services? We mentioned professional services were a bigger target for the criminals.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different parties involved in any given real estate transaction. One, it increases the list of potential targets, but a lot of the processes are still quite archaic. There's forms involved, emails have to be exchanged, conversations have to be had. It presents a whole load of opportunities for adversaries to either gain information to then use in the wider business email compromise campaign, or just to get in the middle of that thread somewhere and do things like divert funds off to another bank account that's not in control of the legitimate parties. And we see that quite often simply because compared to other kind of verticals, real estate and property transactions is a little bit behind sometimes in terms of their processes. So it just represents a better target, a better bang for your buck when you're trying to decide who you should go after.
Got it. And then just to round that one out, criminals pretending to be an employee of your company and purporting to your payroll department to do different actions, which could result in loss.
Okay, so let's run on to the red flags for business email compromise.
James, what do you say about these?
Yeah, so it's when adversaries are trying to get you to do something, they're going to use a number of different techniques to prey on the person. So they're either going to use a very similar email domain. There might be a single character difference, something like that.
Yeah.
Combine that with an implied sense of urgency. They're hoping you won't really look at those details, and you'll go, yeah, that seems right. The terminology's right. That must be okay. But you can think about, well, what's missing? What's not right about this email? Some of the transaction details might not be correct. It might be to the wrong beneficiary. A new company might be inserted. The amounts that they tend to ask for in these cases tend to be whole round amounts, whereas most transactions, something in pence or cents or something like that, quite often with these attacks, it'll be a whole amount of either hundreds or thousands of dollars or something like that.
Yeah.
Non-standard email format. Does it look like something that you would expect to receive from your CEO, from your supplier, from another third party? Just have a look at it, and just if something doesn't feel right, if they're asking you to go about things in an unusual way that doesn't comply to the normal processes, then just have a think, pause, are those potential red flags, and do you need to raise a potential issue?
Yeah, and a practical control step is pick up the phone the person.
Absolutely.
I think we've seen many cases that could have been avoided if a simple phone call had happened. So yeah,
absolutely.
You want to take us through some of the what to spot?
Yeah, so this is a pretty good example of quite a low rent attempt. It's not particularly sophisticated, but you can see at the top there it says it's Microsoft Online Services, but the email address is nothing like from Microsoft. It's Microsoft, I think, at the end there. You've then got the graphics that are contained within that email. They very much look as though they've just been copied and pasted from another place. They just don't look like they fit. One of the other things that you could potentially do is hover over the link in that email, and you can bet that it's probably not going to be going to portal.office.com. It's quite likely going to be going somewhere else. And there's the sense of urgency contained within the email. You must click this or there's going to be an interruption to your service. That's engineered to make people panic and go, well, I need access. I must click this link, otherwise I won't be able to do my job. So there's a number of things that you can spot within that fairly uncomplicated example.
Good stuff. In terms of this particular example, just talk us through some of the things that jump out as red flags.
Yeah, so what we have here are the organization has taken a few technical steps to make it a little bit more obvious. So they've expanded the full email address by default there. They've
okay,
also,
so when it lands, you see the full top piece?
Yeah, precisely. They've also, by the looks of it, taken some advantage of the controls that their email vendor or supplier gives them around detecting spam or potential fraud, and clearly highlighting that in a red box saying something about this doesn't look right.
Yeah.
So they've done a couple of things there that say, do you know what, this probably isn't legitimate, but they've made it very obvious to the user. And the majority of these things are usually free to implement depending on your supplier, and very quick to implement as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Sharon.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to look at a couple of, sorry, Joe, go ahead, James. A couple of case studies from what we're looking at as Kroll currently, yeah?
Yeah, so these are a couple of examples of some cases over the last year or so. So the first one at the top there, 1.5 million diverted by hackers. This is, again, going back to the real estate sector, a law firm who are involved in some of those type of transactions. The adversary has done their homework. They've figured out that the head of the property department has an assistant. They've managed to figure out the email address, and they've engaged that person in an apparently legitimate exchange of emails over a number of weeks or even months, just having a conversation. But they knew that at some point there would need to be an exchange of data.
Yeah.
And when that point came, they sent a weaponized Excel file that dropped a PowerShell-based Trojan onto the system. Once they were able to compromise that system, they were then able to get access to the Office 365 environment. There was no multi-factor authentication.
Mm-hmm.
That assistant also had delegate access to the head of the department as well, so they had some access there. They were able to create a number of rules that made emails automatically move into other folders upon receipt with certain words. So they looked about what transaction should we be looking for. If an email contains these words, if it comes from these senders, it would automatically be moved into another folder and marked as unread. They would then continue the thread on, but with different bank account details. And in that case, in excess of 1.5 million, unfortunately, was lost.
And that was a genuine email account used?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. So no spoofing of an email account in that example.
No.
Okay, just looking at another case that we're busy assisting a client with, a multinational global client, have a couple of subsidiaries around the world. One of them is in the Middle East. So unfortunately, they got attacked on two fronts. The first one was a CFO in the Middle East subsidiary opened what he thought was a link taking him to an internal system that the company uses. Nothing happened. He thought, okay, well, this is fine. He didn't bother to report anything because there was nothing really to report to his IT security. What they did, though, the little malicious code allowed the criminals to gain access over his genuine email address. And through the description that we covered earlier on how the criminals groom the targets, it resulted in him making a massive payment, and the company incurred a huge loss on that one. At the same time, criminals were grooming the CEO of one of the Asian subsidiaries, mainly focused on social engineering aspects using a telephone techniques, and got him to think that he was talking to the group CFO on the phone. So over a number of months, got him comfortable that he was talking to the legitimate person, and gaining his trust, the criminals got him to execute a payment as well. So 40 million lost just between two subsidiaries and one firm. So the numbers are big, and a couple of things coming out of that is that the criminals are, like we mentioned earlier, they're getting bolder. The amounts they're going after are bigger. It used to be in the hundreds of thousands, now it's in the millions. And again, the rapid succession of phishing emails that go out is thousands daily to hundreds and hundreds of people targeted, normally at sort of senior levels in most organizations. James, are we seeing that currently as well?
Yeah, that's very indicative of the types of incidents that we're starting to see, and actually starting to see more of them.
Brilliant. So just moving on. So we put this slide up because we think it's very effective to say that phishing security awareness and training is the way to mitigate this risk. Before training, 30% of folk who would have clicked on a malicious phishing email or a link in an email. After training, 2%. So think of training as the pill that you need to take to reduce that risk. Hey, James, a couple of the more sort of technical controls that can be thought about by folk?
Absolutely. So the first one, and you'll hear this over and over again from all sorts of people, but it stands as good, solid advice. Implement multi-factor authentication. You can quite often do that for free within the various platforms that you're using, but some type of code, some type of prompt on another device when a user tries to authenticate. Another simple procedural step is to implement dual verification for financial transactions. We touched on it earlier on, but having either a phone call or some type of exchange with another party authorized within the business when you want to send money or transact money might just save you from sending some money somewhere that you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Review your email system configurations. Have a look. Have you got all of the right security settings selected? Are you logging the right events? Office 365 has somewhere in excess of 280 security settings. Go and have a look at them. See if there's things that you should be logging and capturing. Should all users be able to have permissions on certain mailboxes, certain applications, read, write, those type of things. The other thing is preparing for the worst when it might happen. So having defined incident response playbooks and practices around things like phishing and business email compromise. Who do you go to when these things occur? How do you escalate them? What are the processes and who's responsible for what? Work closely with your key vendors and partners. So you might have various different people involved in your supply chains or even in your technology stack. Make sure that they're aware of your processes for responding to these type of incidents and that you know how to get hold of them and they know how to get hold of you as well. Having a look at the various different email domains that are out there. Which ones do you have that you are perhaps not using? Which ones are out there through the various threat intelligence sources that are similar to yours? And can you go and proactively have those taken down to potentially reduce the risk as well? And there's a number of different very simple things that you can do.
That's brilliant. So sort of as we get towards the end of the formal presentation, what do you do if you think you've become a victim of business email compromise and you don't have an incident response plan? So we've mentioned an incident response plan. It is something that you've thought of in advance. So if something happens, you're able to follow the sort of decision tree to get you to where you need to be. But if you don't have that, these are the minimum things that we're suggesting that you think about. Number one, contact your bank and your insurance provider. We're talking about money that's been fraudulently lifted out of the organization, leaving your bank account and going to a criminal's bank account. So the first thing you do, get hold of your bank. Make sure your insurance company is aware of it to start the claims process. They may also give you some advice on what to do at that stage as well. Because we're talking about potential fraud, we're talking about a crime, you need to contact the authorities, so in Ireland, the guards. If there's been an international incident, you need to look at your jurisdiction and contact the relevant law enforcement in those countries. And number three, contact specialists. This is a legal problem. You need to have your attorneys involved. You need to turn to companies that provide digital forensic and cybersecurity services to help you figure out exactly what happened, the extent of it. Do you still have a weakness? Is this going to happen again? What do we need to do? What technical controls and other controls do we need to put in place to make sure that things are tightened up? So those are the three things that we're saying. Do it, and you should have some success as well.
But it would be so much better if everyone had their instant responses.
100%, exactly. Rather be prepared than be unprepared.
Exactly. Okay, well, I think we are just about spot on in terms of our 30 minutes. Many thanks to you both, Kevin and James, for sharing your knowledge with us. And of course, thanks to everyone who's joined us on this webinar today. We hope that you got something out of it and that you learned something new and some useful tips on maybe how to mitigate this type of fraud and spot it in the future. If you have any queries at all, please don't hesitate to contact any of us. There's our details on screen. And of course, you can go on to the website www.kroll.com for further information and resources. So again, thanks to you all for joining us and stay safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Sharon.